Good morning, everyone. This is Sam from Medical IT Services, and today we actually have Trevor from Cassin over here. So, our series to setting up a new medical practice, what we were planning was to invite few guests over who can actually give us some advice for doctors who are planning to set up a new practice. So today, our special guest over here is Trevor. Hi, Trevor. How are you?
Sam, hi. I'm very well, thanks. Nice to be with you.
Right, same here. Trevor, all right. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and, the company and what you guys do?
Certainly, Sam. Well, for myself, for about 35 years now, I've been involved in the healthcare industry in various
Wow.
roles. Um, I'm a sales manager with Cassin's Healthcare Design and Construct. Cassin's itself has been in business for over 30 years, based in Castle Hill in Sydney. And in essence, we provide customised fit-out solutions and renovation solutions for our healthcare clients. We only look after healthcare clients. We don't operate in other areas. So we specialise in that space. And there are four probably key areas to our business in terms of our clients. One is general practices or medical centres. The second segment is medical imaging practices, Sam. We also work with dentists and dental specialists. And finally, we also assist veterinarians. So I appreciate animal health is not obviously human health, but there's a lot of synergies between those four key
Yeah.
areas of our business.
No, that's a great area to be specialized in, definitely. And I think with the healthcare sector, it's very important for the whole industry to be, because they have compliance regulation over there as well, and specifically, they have the heavy machinery, especially for dentists. They have those chairs and stuff. So I'm pretty sure, like a company like yours would be a great help to them in order to setting it up. So 30 years, wow, Trevor, that's a lot.
It is, Sam. It is. It's not very long when you say it quickly, but 30 years is an exceptional period of time.
It's a long period
Um,
of time.
and I think Cassin's is a great business model, if I can say that. It
Mhm.
started out as a family business, and what I can absolutely say with a lot of confidence, those family values extend to the way that we hopefully interact and partner with our clients. So we like to almost treat our clients as a family member or a partner.
Yeah, that's definitely great strategy. But tell me this, Trevor, why
Mhm.
healthcare? I guess you can still ask the same question to me, but it will be my question that why healthcare industry?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And going back to the origins of the company, I think an opportunity came up in the healthcare space to assist a particular client. And as the owner of the business back then, saw an opportunity to assist and work with healthcare clients. And literally one thing led to another. I think as a result of some positive feedback to a piece of work, more work came our way through word of mouth. And it got to the point where other, I suppose, opportunities were sort of passed over to focus literally on the healthcare segment. Because you're right, I mean, you said a few minutes ago that there are a lot of elements to a healthcare project that you need to be aware of, whether it's the weight of the machinery or various other elements. For example, we just don't do the construction work, Sam. We also like to play a key role in the design of a medical centre or practice. So all
Hmm.
the designs that we provide to our clients are already compliant to the Australian Standard 1428 for access and mobility. And that gives our clients, I think, some peace of mind to know that what we're putting down on paper is actually compliant.
That's compliant.
So we're
Okay.
taking into account, for example, someone who may be in a wheelchair or have some mobility issues. We allow, I suppose, in terms of the distances of the widths of the corridor and the widths of the doorways, that those people can easily navigate through a practice. So our designs have a very practical element as in terms of taking into account those people who have some mobility issues. So we do that anyway for all our designs.
Oh, that's definitely great. But Trevor, one question comes to my mind. So, for example, what happens if a medical center is not compliant in terms of the fit out or the construction? What happens then?
It does depend, Sam, on the scale or the scope of works. If it's a significant fit out, so literally from a bare shell, there are some approvals that need to be completed via a private certifier. And a private certifier's role is to make sure that the building company is literally being compliant. So we set up our plans and our designs with those measurements in mind to ensure that we're going to get approval by a private certifier. So we do that at the first step because it's easier to do that and then get to the approval process rather than have someone say, I'm sorry, your design isn't compliant, and then you've got to go and correct the issue. So we try and take that into account at the very early stages of our planning rather than have to take corrective action later on, if that makes sense. But look, if it's a relatively straightforward renovation, again, what we do is we assess it to make sure that it is compliant, and we'll share those details with our client, obviously. But if it's just painting some walls or setting up a bookshelf, and you're not moving any passageways, etc., in terms of getting access to a fire exit, well, those sorts of compliance issues or approvals, I beg your pardon, normally don't apply. So it just depends on the size and the scope of the renovation or the fit out, Sam, is probably the easiest way to answer your question.
Now, what about, like, I've seen few doctors who normally start up their practices from a small, residential place, like a home or old home. So do you think that they would be requiring your assistance in order to getting a compliance?
Yes, definitely. So if a doctor purchases what has been a residential property, and many practices operate out of such buildings, at some point there will be required council approval because it's a change of use. The building is going from being a primary residence to health consulting rooms. So council approval will be required in those instances as well, Sam. And along with that, council will look very closely at things like ensuring there's sufficient on-site parking, and normally the parking has got to be on the block rather than on the street. So what we do quite a lot is help clients assess properties to ensure that hopefully the approval will be granted by council. But before we even get to that stage, taking measurements on the block to ensure there's sufficient area and turning space, etc., to install on-site parking. So there's some pretty big considerations. And sometimes in the excitement of a new project, purchasing a property and saying, okay, well, I'm going to start up my own medical centre or health consulting rooms, some of those very important details from a council approval perspective may be overlooked because understandably the doctor's very excited about securing the property and opening the new practice. But there are a range of approvals that we need to work through to ensure the practice can open and be converted from a residence to health consulting rooms.
That's great. That's actually great information. So I think with the continuation of these answers, I would like to just ask you another question saying, so basically now let's imagine I'm a new doctor and I'm planning to set up a new practice. So what could be the strategy for setting up a new medical practice?
Yeah, really good question, Sam. One of the key things that need to, I suppose, be done in advance is to be very, very clear with your objectives. And every doctor will have different objectives and different priorities, but spending a little bit of time and jotting down those key objectives are really important because that's going to help formulate basically the doctor's requirements, but also the things like the image that you want to project from your new practice, the sort of services you'd like to offer at the practice, the number of staff, etc. I mean, there's a lot to consider, but starting with some key objectives is a very good place to start. And that way, it doesn't mean those objectives may be set in stone for some time to come. But if you've got a clear outline of what you want to achieve, it's always much easier than necessarily changing those plans down the track when you get some more information. That may occur, but having a clear idea of what you want to achieve and by when is a great starting point, Sam.
That's great. And when you're saying that, in terms of an objective, what would be an objective of the doctors? Like, sort of color schemes or themes, or, what is it going to be? Some few people like it, like the medical center to be an exact representation of a five-star hotel kind of thing. So,
Yes.
how does the fit out plays role in there? Like, do you normally look at the looks of it as well, or the looks the doctors are trying to achieve, or you basically make sure that both ends meet? So, like, the whole architecture and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Normally what we would try and do is align our understanding of what the doctor is looking to achieve with their requirements. In other words, you may have a practice, Sam, where the doctor says, well, we're going to need 4 consulting rooms and a waiting area and perhaps a pathology room, for example. And they're very clear things that need to be incorporated into the planning for the practice. So getting that information is always very helpful, because we want to make sure our plans reflect those key requirements. But then looking at things like the workflow, in other words, how we're going to arrange those rooms within the space to ensure we're maximising efficiency, we're maximising the available floor space is very important, but also take into account any other elements that the doctor may want to include. For example, you might look at a reception waiting area, Sam, and that's a great space to put your own personality or reinforce your brand or reinforce the practice image that you want to project to your patients.
That's right.
So that's an area, because that's the first point of contact with the practice that a patient will have. So creating a positive first impression is, I think, pretty important to most people, but it just depends what sort of impression the doctor wants to present to the patient. Now, once we understand that, and we can help guide the doctor through that process, by the way, but once we understand that, we can then present some solutions or suggestions around how the doctor may be able to achieve that look, that image, that branding that's important to them. Then once you move the patient through to the more clinical areas of the practice, you might want to have, rather than a definite colour scheme or branding exercise in the reception area, as you move through to the clinical areas, you might want a more practical and functional look to the practice. So getting that information either down on paper or understanding what the doctor is looking to achieve is really important, because it means hopefully the doctor's objectives can then align with the design, and then how we might enhance that design through the choice or use of colours or other things that we can do in the practice to, put, I suppose, an individual stamp on the practice rather than one that just looks like the practice down the road. That may not be the best option for the doctor at that point.
No, that was definitely, that's what I was about to ask. The next question was that, will it be a standard practice? Because that's good, like I've been to several medical centers myself, and they should all have, they all have a similar, some areas which are pretty standard, like in terms of computer setup and things like that. And I remember visiting I visited a specialist clinic recently. And I told them, well, you guys are GP, are you? And they said, no, we are specialists. I said, well, your practice looks exactly like a GP style practice. So definitely it has that some sort of, the whole lookout it's exactly the same. So it's definitely a great idea if if you're allowing doctors to customize it a bit further in terms of the front of that gets changed or sometimes colors. But I think the toughest thing for you would be to deciding which colors the doctors like, isn't it? Because that could be a challenge by itself.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. Uh, the color selection can be a bit daunting because there are thousands of colors. We're very fortunate at Cassins. We've got a member of our team as a qualified interior designer.
Okay,
So
that's great.
if a doctor says to us, I want to project this image or I like this particular color, whichever way they want to go, what we can do is share some options. So then, the decision maker is not looking at thousands of different colors. They can
Mm.
do that if they want to, but we can bring that range down to say, well, here are a number of shades that would work really well given what you've just told us. So it then may come down to 3 or 4 or half a dozen colors rather than
Mm.
having to wade through thousands and thousands of colors because unless you're really interested in that, Sam, not many people have got the time to do that.
No, no, definitely. Like, but you'll still come across few people who would still go in that direction and spend more
Yeah,
time there, because yeah,
that's
like
right.
some people wants things to be in a bit more detail, and that's pretty good. Like, there's nothing wrong about it.
Yeah. No,
But
no, no.
but definitely, that's definitely differentiates them from the other practices as well.
Correct. And the selection of colours, and this has been proven, can have a significant impact on both patients and staff. So having that, I suppose, clarity around what's preferred or what they would like to achieve, we can assist them to do that. For example, the colour blue or blues or greens or even greys to an extent can have quite a calming effect.
Mm,
But that doesn't mean you need to paint every wall blue.
blue.
You can have a neutral colour on the wall, but you might have some blue cushions or some blue artwork to just create a different look and feel. And again, so you're not looking the same as the practice just down the road. It's all part of the branding exercise, but also how the stakeholders want the practice to look and feel. So there's a number of things we can do to assist with that.
That's great. All right. So moving to the next phase of the construction. So, like we have chosen the colors, we have chosen the
Mm-hmm.
whole layout, and I'm assuming you guys will give the whole floor plan along with
Mm-hmm.
what goes where, and then that's get approved. Now, what could be a difference between a company who normally does fit outs or a
Mm-hmm.
company who does a medical fit out? What's the key points differentiator? Why should people be going for companies who are more specialized in the healthcare space?
Yeah, that's another good question, Sam. Well, I mentioned earlier that our designs are compliant with the Australian standards. So having someone that's understands the Australian standard and the various measurements and the rules around that. For example, if a practice needs a wheelchair ramp to provide an option to get into or out of the practice, understanding how long that ramp needs to be to comply is very important. And just having people that really understand those requirements is significant because it just means the doctor hopefully gets a lot of peace of mind that the design is going to be compliant. But beyond that, there are some other things to consider. And if you're choosing someone to fit out your practice, having someone that understands what's important to the doctors and their patients, I think is really important.
Mm,
For example, one key element, Sam, that we see time and time again is the requirement to soundproof a consulting space. So very private and personal conversations can't be held
right.
down the hall. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon, can't be heard down the hall. We want those conversations to be contained within that space.
Mm,
So the use of a hinged door is much more, I suppose, able to be quite soundproof versus a sliding door. It's very difficult to soundproof a sliding door. Not impossible, but just very difficult. And the amount of insulation that you need to put in the walls and even up in the ceiling, Sam, to ensure that that space is as soundproof as it possibly can be. But outside that room, having music playing through speakers just at a relatively low volume can also assist with prohibiting conversation transmission into other areas of the practice. So because those conversations are so private and so important, again, we can use our expertise to make sure that if the doctor partners with a company like us, we can share those experiences. So it'd be terrible for the doctor to walk into their new practice and start providing the services that they need to provide, and then they discover that the conversations can be heard, I beg your pardon, down the hallway. We can prevent that sort of thing by applying some of the knowledge that we've acquired over the years.
No, definitely. So basically, soundproofing the consulting rooms, is that a compliance requirement, or is that something which is an add-on benefit a consulting room like a doctor should consider?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. It's more a case of an add-on benefit. But if the doctor is going to invest in fitting out the practice, it's a consideration that I think is pretty important, that they want to make sure that the practices using some really good sound insulation materials to prevent those conversations happening. Now, moving back to your original question about shop fitter versus a company that specialises in healthcare fit outs, someone that may not be fully aware of that and is just looking to provide a very cost-effective option to the doctor may not have either that knowledge or may not include soundproofing as part of the quotation. Sure. And if you look at the quotation without having that background knowledge, you may be able to save a few $1,000s, but it's probably not really a saving if then the doctor's got to invest in putting in those soundproofing measures after the fit out has been completed. So I think, again, there's a level of peace of mind of partnering with an organisation that's got experience in healthcare fit outs. So you don't have to worry about those sorts of small but important things.
And that's actually 30 years of experience. So definitely you guys have come across so many challenges that will come with the, with the fit out. So, and I believe it's definitely like normally, like, when we deal with new projects or new builds as well, mostly, medical IT, we specializes in new builds as well. And we actually work along with the fit out companies, to explain them how many network points we require in each room and which devices goes, which network points, what type of, how many MPA switch we need in the server room, things like that. So, because obviously, we knew our part of the job where it's requirement, but there are so many other things which require. So it's very important. Selecting, having the right fit out company is very important. Like, I'll be very honest, I've come across few fit out guys which had no clue, how healthcare space works, and obviously they were not. The soundproofing one is definitely a good option. I've never noticed that, but like I've come across few fit out guys during our experience, and I was like, do you guys have experience in the healthcare space before? And they're like, no, we just do normal shop fit out. I'm like, okay, that's a good challenge, because there will be so many things, the doctor might end up facing if they're not following the proper standard. So yeah, that's definitely, it's a very important point to, having or getting involved with the company who actually, knows the space. So Trevor, like, looking at that aspect, I think one of the reasons why people will not go with specialized people could be one of the budget constraints or, cost involvements. So what do you think, like, do you guys normally offer a custom kind of services as well, or a consulting only, or what's a roughly cost involved depending on, let's take an average of, 5 doctors practice.
Yeah.
5 full-time doctors practice, yeah.
It sounds like that's a busy practice even before we start planning, Sam.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's difficult to give a either an average number or even a range, and the reason for that is it really does depend on the building. For example, if we need to install air conditioning or not, that can be a significant
Cost.
component of a fit out project. So, and if that's in or out, just by quoting a number, it can be so far out, it's not funny. So what we try and do when a doctor quite rightly asks, well, you know, what is this going to cost me? What we like to try and do is, if it's possible, to visit the site, Sam, and we can do what we call a site assessment. And it will take into account if air conditioning, for example, is required or not. It will also look at things like access. And when I say access, how easy it will be for the patients to enter the practice. Do we need to install a ramp? Is the ramp already there? What in terms of internal wall structures are there? What needs to be removed? So there are so many elements that go into answering that question. We find the most accurate way to do it is to understand what the doctor's looking to achieve, and that might just be a very broad series of requirements, and then visiting the site, and then perhaps looking at presenting a plan to the doctor and say, well, does this meet your requirements? And then working with the doctor to come up with a plan that really does. Once we've got that and it's down on paper and the doctor's broadly happy with it, then we can start presenting what we call a project budget, which is, in essence, we might not be at the point where we're confirming specific finishes within the practice, but we can provide the doctor with a document that they can potentially take to a financial institution to say, look, here's what I'm looking at fitting out this space for 5 doctors. Well, we need 5 consulting rooms, we need a treatment room and all the other requirements within the space. And then the doctor at least has a number that he can discuss or she can discuss with their partners, but also take that to a financial institution to discuss finance options. Doing it that way is far more accurate than just saying it costs X or Y for 5 doctors, if that makes sense. It's probably a lot more accurate in terms of providing the doctor with a number if you work that way, rather than just saying it's going to cost whatever it's going to cost. Does that make sense, Sam?
That definitely makes sense. Now, in terms of, do you guys have display centers where doctors can come and have a look and see what could be a look and feel, or do you normally offer things like 3D designs beforehand to show them how the practice is going to look like?
Yeah, so there's a number of things that we can offer the doctor. One, I suppose, key element is we've got, after 30 years, we've got a number of clients who are quite happy to welcome doctors into their practice. So we can actually take them to premises at a time that's convenient for all stakeholders and show them examples of our work. We're very happy to share digital images of our work. We're very happy to welcome people to our office in Castle Hill, where we can show them a range of finishes and materials in our offices. So there's a number of ways that we can do that. But yes, we also have, as part of our drafting software, Sam, the capacity to provide 2D or 3D sketches. So before a hammer is picked up, the doctor can get a feel for how the practice may look and feel. So there's a number of tools at our disposal that we can share with the doctor to try and assist them get a feel for how their practice may look and feel down the track.
No, that's right. And I think one just quick question came to my mind was like, do you guys help only with a floor plan or with the design where the building is already developed, established, or if it's a brand new building and it's a brand new construction altogether from the scratch, do you also help them design that whole floor plans depending on where the consulting room goes and where the treatment room goes? Do you help with that as well?
Yes, is the short answer. It really does. Our service is very customized. So it really depends on the doctor's situation, and we can do as much or as little as is required, but literally from a bare block,
Mhm.
looking to literally build the practice, we can do that. We can assist a client who may have a practice and wants to remove some walls to make the workflow a lot more efficient. It really comes down to what the doctor's wanting to do.
Mhm.
With some doctors, if it's just a minor renovations, maybe concept floor plans aren't required because it's a relatively straightforward process. But something more complex, we'd be very happy to assist the doctor with some plans and make some suggestions around how the space could be utilised very well. But it really comes down to, Sam, what the doctor's looking to achieve, and then we can customise our offering to suit the doctor and the doctor's circumstances.
No, that's great. So, Trevor, tell me this: what would be a patient's experience journey after they actually walk into a practice? How is that important with the fit out? How important is that?
Well, I personally think it's very important because the doctors are in business essentially to provide, specific healthcare
Mhm.
advice and suggestions and services to the patient. So the patient, I think, is critical in the process, and creating a positive patient experience means hopefully that patient will come back to the doctor for ongoing advice. So what our role in, I suppose, assisting the doctor to provide those sorts of services is to make sure the physical elements of the practice work for the doctor, work for the doctor's staff, but also for the patients. So it's not just one person that we'd be looking to, I suppose, appease. We want to look after the doctor, his team, but also the patients as a collective. But as I mentioned earlier, if you want to focus just for a second on the patient, making sure potentially that if the doctor's looking to create a warm and welcoming feel for patients, we can provide some design suggestions on how we might be able to achieve that for the doctor and the doctor's team. But also getting feedback, Sam, from the doctor and his team or her team, to ensure that we're taking on board sorts of things that they like or don't like, disregarding the don't like, obviously, to ensure that patient experience is at the forefront of our design, because that might mean we need to suggest some layout changes to ensure that the patient, for example, isn't walking all the way through the practice to get to a consult room. You might have a design situation where you have the consult rooms reasonably close to the waiting area. So particularly for an elderly patient, they're not having to walk all the way through the practice. Also, things like having the treatment room, where possible, Sam, positioned approximately centrally in the practice. So if, as a result of the consultation, the patient needs to go into a treatment room, again, they're not having to walk all the way through the practice to get to the treatment room. It's hopefully in a location that it's quite easy for them to access. So those sorts of design elements, in line with the doctor's requirements, I think are important to take on board, so we can come up with a design that hopefully meets the doctor's requirements, the doctor's staff, but very importantly, the patient as well.
No, I'll definitely agree with this because, I just, when you were saying that, I realized I've been to a few practices where I actually noticed, the consulting rooms are really far, but the
Yes.
office admin people are sitting just closer to the reception. And, I just realized, oh, isn't if they would have used the office admin space as a consulting room, it would be more easier or more. And I've actually noticed there was another practice where I was working for, and the treatment room was really at the back. Like, it's a 20 consulting room practice, and the
Wow.
consulting room was the nurse room was actually, the treatment room is all the way at the back. So you actually had to go and walk through around 12 consulting rooms to get access to the treatment room. So that definitely the whole layout matters, and it can be a challenging to to understand the patient's requirement and then design that. So I'm glad you guys are well aware of that. Now, few questions which I wanted to also, like, we're going towards the closing of our session, but a few things, like, it's been such an interesting topic, and we've been discussing this, and I believe I'm glad that it will be helpful for a lot of doctors who are actually trying to set up their practice, because this is the key important point, having the right architecture for the place, and the patient experience we just spoke about, and the whole layout, compliance requirement. And obviously, you guys have 30 years of experience. So tell me this, Trevor, have you come across, like, during this whole time, have you ever come across something where the doctor really wanted that thing, but it was not compliant, or it was conflicting with the compliance requirement? You did. So would you like to share that experience more with that?
Yeah, absolutely, Sam. I mean, and it's an important point, because it becomes a balancing act, doesn't it? I guess.
Mm,
Now, there's some things just on that compliance point where, if a practice has been operating for many, many years, and I think you used an example, or one of the questions you asked earlier is about uh, uh, converting a residential property into health consulting rooms. So if you can imagine a property that's been there for some time and has had approval to go from a residence to health consulting rooms, but if the property was built many, many years ago, there's a fair chance that the doors in that property, the door widths, I beg your pardon, may not be compliant. Now, if the approval has been granted some time ago, that's okay to provide medical services from that property. It's only if you really want to make some changes where we'd have to extend those doors today. So in other words, they were compliant years ago. They're not compliant now, but if the doctor's not looking to change anything significantly, that previous approval means that it's okay. Now,
mm,
if they wanted to make any changes, it would require them moving those doorways potentially. And again, there's a whole range of ways that we could do that. But what we try and do is, if something the doctor wants and it's not compliant, we just explain to the doctor, well, this is what you want to do. Here is the Australian standard, and this is why it's probably not potentially a great idea. And we can show some practical examples. So rather than saying to the doctor, no, that you can't do that, you can explain some of the difficulties and how it may impact on the workflow of the practice. And is that something the doctor really wants to entertain? So rather than no, straight up, you can show in real terms how it might, impact the workflow, Sam, of the practice, is probably a better way to look at it. But yes, it does happen.
mm. That's interesting. All right. So, before in terms of, I'm not going to ask you how much is definitely it's going to be a cost, or what could be a budget of the doctor, because obviously that all depends on the type of work they require and things like that. But can you normally list or tell us few things where you actually can help them out with? So for example, if it's a requirement, can you help them with the electrician, you know the painter, the whole thing, or you give them a full turnkey solution where it's A to Z, end to end, uh give handed over keys to them, and they can start running the practice? What's the commitment of yours involved?
Yeah, Sam. So in essence, if the doctor says to us, right, can you show me some designs for my practice? We can absolutely do that. And we can present, either the doctor may have a really clear layout in his or her mind of how they want the practice to look. And we can basically do a couple of things at that point. We can provide them with a plan that hopefully replicates what they have in mind, but also we can also suggest options around if that was option A, here's option B, which might offer some suggested improvements potentially to what they want. And then it's up to the doctor, Sam, to decide, is it option A or option B, the one with the improvements. We can manage certainly any approvals that need to occur based on that plan, be they a council approval or private certifiers approval, to make sure that the works are completed to the required standard. As I mentioned earlier, we've got an interior designer on our team that can assist with the colour selection. We, over 30 years, Sam, we've partnered with other providers such as air conditioning specialists, electrical contractors, plumbing specialists. So because we've been operating in the space for some period of time, we have a high standard given the clients that we're working for, and our partners understand that they need to achieve that high standard as well. So we partner with people who we're very confident that can assist us in delivering the project based on the doctor's requirements. So in essence, we can manage the whole project from start to finish. Or if the doctor said, look, I just want a design service package, can you assist? Yes, we absolutely can. So it really depends on what the doctor's looking to achieve. And we can do as much of the project or as little of the project as the doctor requires. It really just depends on the circumstances, and we will customise our service offering depending on what the doctor requires.
No, that's actually definitely great, because sometimes the doctors come across, and we have actually noticed that as well with our jobs as well. Doctors might just come and says, hey, my cousin does the painting job, or my friend does it, so can you accommodate him along? Or actually one of the very unusual requirement came to us when we were designing a logo for a medical center, and the doctor just came up with saying, hey, my daughter, and she's like 6-7 years old, designed a logo for my business by herself.
Wow.
And can you use that instead? I'm like, okay, that's a challenge, but it was pretty good, because it definitely has that emotional value in there, because that was doctor's daughter who designed that. And we actually took that. We said, okay, you know what? We're not going to use it was pretty good. We were not going to use the exact design, but we'll improvise. But the base concept is going to be the same. So we used that and we developed the actual logo, and the doctor loved it. I'm like, so that's great, because now it's not just a logo, but it's a logo with an emotional value attached to it. So definitely, I think when it comes to Fitout, if people have those emotional things attached to it, they would more relate to it, and they feel more comfortable with that.
I think that's a great example, and what a good on you for working with the doctor and his or her creative child to come up with a logo. That's brilliant. But I think you're right. The emotional side of a fit out or a logo is so important. And I often like to ask, when a doctor may say, hey, I want 3 consulting rooms, I want this, and I want that in my practice. What I often try to ask is, that's great, thank you for sharing that with us, but how do you want your patients to feel about your practice? And what does a successful outcome look like for you, doctor? Getting that information from the doctor is really important, because you're then starting to understand from an emotional point of view what the doctor's looking to achieve, as well as the physical elements, Sam, as well as the number of consulting rooms, etc. But understanding the emotional side of the fit out, I think, is really important.
Great. I think we're going to be going towards the last part of it, and the last part is a really important part of it, because obviously, and definitely you might have come across this many times where people are saying, hey, my practice needs to be set up, and it needs to start in July, and it's only 2 months left or 1 month left. Can you tell me how much time it's going to take for us to get that whole thing arranged? So, what's a time constraint required, for a whole fit out perspective?
Yeah, really good question. And one of the things that we like to try and do in our very early discussions with a potential client is, once we understand broadly what they're looking to achieve, Sam, we always try to, or like to ask, and when would you like to be operational by? And sometimes those timeframes are very, very short for a whole host of reasons. There might be lease or purchase obligations the doctor is tied into, which is completely understandable. But one of the things we're seeing at the moment, and have seen probably now for a couple of years, particularly with COVID, is the amount of time that it takes to obtain the materials to construct the practice or to do the renovation or the fit out has lengthened considerably. I guess, for example, if you think about an average fit out, going back probably more than 2 years ago, we'd allow sort of somewhere around about 4 to 6 weeks to gather those materials, Sam. At the moment, we're looking at a minimum of 8 weeks. So you can see, just to get the materials. So before we walk into the practice, to gather the materials we need to do the work, the time frame is blown out due to a range of supply chain issues, and that has to be factored in to the fit out timeline. Any approvals, we know, having worked with councils and private certifiers over the years, we know roughly how long a council approval or a private certifier's approval can take. So we build that into our initial timeline. And then we have, the timeline based on the actual fit out. So there's the preparation period, which includes gathering the materials and getting the approvals, because without the approvals, you can't do the fit out, and then the fit out. So explaining to the client how long that period is, using some realistic timeframes, recent timeframes, helps us to communicate what is going to be achievable. And we'd rather do that early on, because I had an example recently where a client rang and said, I need a new cupboard or a piece of joinery done, Sam. And I said, fine, yeah, we'd be happy to help. When do you need it by? And he said, it needs to be in by next Wednesday. And I think he spoke to me on the previous Thursday. So in less than a week, he wanted this joinery. It wasn't a very big cupboard, and it could be done, but there's no way we could even gather the materials for that and complete it within a week. And I said to him, look, I'm so sorry, if you need that done within a week, I'm going to have to suggest that you go and find a local joiner to get that done. Now, I know that's just a cupboard versus a complete fit out, but the timing of the doctor's requirements is very important to us. So we'd rather tell people straight or as early as possible if something is feasible in terms of a time frame, or if it's not. And we'll always try and work with the client to see if there are ways we can reduce those time frames. But that is a major challenge, because often there are things that the doctor's working towards that are completely outside of our control and outside the doctor's control, by the way. But I think the clear communication is one way you can get around some of those obstacles.
And that's great. That's so much information in today's session. And Trevor, I think what I've actually learned from the whole today's sessions and what the questions I've said, that if I'm actually a doctor who would be willing to setting up my practice, that would definitely, now would be going with a person who has more experience, because it's not only about the compliance, and it's not only about the medicals and it looks nice, but I think the main important aspects in whole of that is the peace of mind. And the having the easiness to understand and to know that I'm in safe hands, and the practice would turn out to be good. It's not like, oh, I've given a fit out to a company and now suddenly I'm gonna come up with a new requirement altogether. So it's having that peace of mind that everything is gonna go well is more important for a person like me, and especially when I'm setting up a new practice, because a new practice, there are so many challenges. You can't be involved in all of it. There are so many things where you need to leave it to the professionals who are trained and who have that experience in the industry.
I think that's a good point, Sam. And we take some pride in trying to take some of that load and some of that stress away from our clients, the doctors. We can manage that and basically keep the doctor informed as to where we're up to in the project. But doctors are very, very busy people. They're doing really important work. We can take some of that stress and some of that pain away for them and allow them to get on with what they're very, very good at.
No, that's great. It was all right. Thank you so much, Trevor, for coming. It was lovely having you as a guest, and definitely we have learned a lot of information, and probably will be, sharing the whole session details online as well. And if anyone has any contact requirements for Cassins, I'll share their website quickly. I was supposed to share it in the middle, but it's not too late. I'll just share the website details quickly. Give me a second, so that you guys can easily contact them. And give me a second. Trevor, let me know if you can see the screen.
I can see the screen, Sam.
All right. So the website is, if you want to visit the website, it's C for Charlie, A for Alpha, S for Sam, S for Sam, I for India, N for Nancy, S for Sam.com.au. And you can see that lovely website here. They're showing you, the sites they have done. I think there are a few examples they can also show you with the medical fit outs, dental fit outs. Yeah, I think that was the past work. So you can definitely see all the new designs here, some client testimonials as well, and few clients they have worked with. And here are the contact details for Cassin. Trevor, before we end, would you like to add anything to it?
Oh, Sam, I'd just like to thank you very much for the kind invitation to participate in today's session. You're doing some great work with medical centres, and we're just delighted that you reached out and invited us to participate. So thank you very much.
Thank you. More important is thank you so much for coming in and sharing that information, because it's for doctors, this is really important. This is the starting stage of what needs to be done, and having a clear idea and planning to do what they need to do is very important. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Sam. And I was just going to say one final thing. If ever I can assist any of your clients with a no obligation phone discussion to talk about their situation, we're happy to share some advice, and then the doctor can make his or her decision on where to from there. But happy to try and share some of our experience that we've gained over the years to assist any potential clients.
That will be lovely. Thank you so much. So, all my viewers, this is an opportunity for you to cash in. So Cassin is actually offering you a no obligation charge. And I think you said it was free consulting, the first session?
I think we can do that for free, yes, Sam.
Yeah. So it's actually a complimentary session. All the people who are watching this, you can definitely go and talk to Trevor. He's a great guy, and just have a discussion. You don't need to sign anything. Don't worry about it. Just go and have a chat and see, what if it's something which you would consider or you would not. So, but definitely it's worth having a chat and see what the future plans could look like, because it's definitely an exciting time for doctors who are setting up their practice. These are also a few important things you should consider. All right. Thank you so much, Trevor, for coming.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Take care.
Take care.